Well, thank you all very much for coming. It's good to see everybody. It's very encouraging. It's very, very encouraging to be here with so many comrades in arms in a battle, because there is a war going on. And so thank you all for being here. Thank you all for the invitation to speak. Thank you everybody for coming. Today I want to talk about 47 years of false hope. Come on. Abortion and the Supreme Court. All right, there we go. So first we're going to look at, and again, some of you have seen this before. There is some new stuff that I think you'll like. But there's really two ways to deal with the Supreme Court. We hear a lot about Roe versus Wade, and the reason that we can't end abortion is because of Roe versus Wade, because the Supreme Court says that Roe versus Wade is a law of the land, because a woman has a right to an abortion under the Constitution, they say. And there's two ways to deal with the court and to deal with Roe versus Wade. The first way is to try to change the court. And that's what we've been doing for the last 47 years, by trying to get pro-life justices on the court to get them to overturn Roe versus Wade. The other way to deal with the court is to ignore it. To ignore it, at least in the instance of Roe versus Wade, when it violates the Constitution. This talk is going to not be talking about ignoring it, but I'm going to talk about that later this evening. This talk is about that first strategy to change the court and what that has looked like over the last 47 years. So this is really some time travel. We're going to go back and we're going to look at what the last 47 years of trying to end the court has looked like. Hold on one second. Okay, great. All right, so this is what the strategy of the pro-life lobby has been for the last 47 years. Many of you are familiar with this. Many of you have seen this. When you go talk to legislators, you will hear this. And this is what's been going on for the last 47 years. You may not have seen it broken down quite to this extent, but this is what the strategy of the pro-life lobby has been, at least from a political, legal perspective. And that is to elect Republican presidents, to appoint pro-life justices to overturn Roe versus Wade. While doing that, pass incremental legislation to undermine Roe, save some babies, and weaken the pro-abortion movement. That is the strategy of the pro-life lobby over the last 47 years. So we're just going to walk through this strategy one at a time and see what it has looked like and what the issues with it are. So elect Republican presidents. Well, we've been doing that for the last 47 years. You can go back even 51 years, whenever abortion was already on the national scene, it was in the national conversation in the late 60s. There were states that were beginning to liberalize their abortion laws. There were cases that were already coming up to the court. The Supreme Court had actually even decided a case related to abortion at this point, but not yet to Roe versus Wade. In 1969, we had a Republican president, Richard Nixon, followed by another Republican president, Gerald Ford, and then a Democrat president. And then we had Ronald Reagan, and then Ronald Reagan again, and then President Bush. And then we had President Clinton for 2 terms, and then another President Bush for 2 terms, President Obama for 2 terms, and today we have President Trump since 2017. So for the last 51 years, 31 of those have been under Republican presidents. For the last 47 years since Roe versus Wade, 27 of those have been under Republican presidents. Almost 60% of the years since Roe versus Wade have been with a Republican in the White House. So that's why whenever people come to me and say, this whole abortion thing is just the Democrats' fault, I say, well, there's plenty to blame over there, but it's not just their fault. And you'll see more of that as we go on. So we've been following the pro-life lobby strategy. We've been electing Republican presidents, and we've been winning at that, because most of our presidents for the last 47 years have been Republicans. On to step 2, or play number 2 in the playbook, is to appoint pro-life justices. That's why we're electing these Republican presidents, right? Now, there are other reasons on other issues, but on this issue, that's why we're electing them. There were a lot of people in every election that, since I've been paying attention, that said, well, I'm not a huge fan of this guy, but I'm going to vote for him because he's going to appoint pro-life justices to the court. Well, that's been going on. Let's go back to 1973 and just real fast look at what the court looked like at that time, and then we're going to see how these justices have been appointed ever since then. So in 1973, the court looked like this, with 9 justices there that you can see on the bottom. One of them appointed by Democrat, FDR, 2 of them appointed by Republican, Eisenhower, 2 of them by Democrat, John F. Kennedy, and 4 of them appointed by Republican, Richard Nixon. So that at the time of Roe versus Wade, this is what the Supreme Court looked like. There were 6 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court and only 3 Democrat appointees. Well, you already know what happened. And that is that 7 of those justices voted to create out of nothing this supposed right to an abortion. And they ruled in the majority in Roe versus Wade. Do you see that? Do you see? Look at the justices who voted for Roe versus Wade. 5 of them are Republican appointees. That means even if the court was all Republican appointees, all you need is 5 to win, which means even if there were no Democrat appointees on the court, we still would have gotten Roe versus Wade back in 1973 because 5 of them voted for Roe. And in fact, one of the Democrat appointees voted against it, the same number as the Republicans who voted against it. Well, some people say, well, Bradley, we did not know it was going to be an issue when we were electing those presidents to appoint those people. We didn't know it was going to be an issue. Those presidents didn't know it was going to be an issue. They didn't know to talk to them and talk to them about the issue of abortion. Well, I think it already really was on the national scene, but let's just for the sake of argument grant, okay, maybe they didn't know. But once Roe versus Wade came down, they knew. We need to appoint justices who are going to overturn this. And they began telling us that that's exactly what they were doing. Gerald Ford, he starts appointing justices. One of the justices who voted for Roe versus Wade goes off the court, and Gerald Ford replaces him with a Republican appointee. Great. This is good. Oh, but no, we're losing ground. Now we got a Democrat president. We're going to lose some ground here because he's going to appoint people. Actually, no. I feel sorry for President Jimmy Carter because he doesn't get to appoint anybody to the Supreme Court, which means we're winning. We're electing Republicans, and they're appointing people to the court. Then President Reagan comes along, and someone who votes for Roe goes off the court, and he replaces them, presumably with someone who's going to vote against Roe, right? And another one who voted for Roe goes off the court, and President Reagan replaces him, again, with someone who's going to vote against Roe. At this point, we've already replaced enough that you could overturn Roe right now if all of those people, all of those new people, voted to overturn it. You could do it right now. You don't even need any more. But it gets even better, though, because he gets to keep appointing. He gets to appoint another one. Someone else who voted for Roe goes off the court, and he gets to appoint another justice to the court. Now we have 6-3, we could overturn Roe. Now we get another Republican president. We're winning. We are on a roll here because now we've had 4 Republican appointees to the court in a row and 0 Democrat appointees. We're on a roll. And guess what? Another one who voted for Roe goes off the court. Perfect. We'll replace him with someone who's going to vote against Roe. And then the only Democrat left who voted for Roe goes off the court because the other one, Justice White, voted against Roe. Excellent. Now, look at this. Look at this lineup that we, Republicans, have achieved by electing our Republican presidents who are going to appoint our pro-life justices who are going to overturn Roe. This is what it looked like in 1992. There have been 6 justices appointed since Roe versus Wade, replacing 6 who voted for Roe versus Wade. There's only 1 left who voted for Roe versus Wade. 100% of those since Roe have been appointed by Republican presidents. If that's not a recipe for success, then I don't know what is, at least under that strategy. Okay? This should be a slam dunk that they're going to overturn Roe right now if they're doing what they're telling us they're doing. In fact, the one guy who voted for Roe, there's been 19 years of science and medical and all sorts of things going on. Maybe he'll change his mind. We could get a unanimous decision at this point. But you already know that's not what happens. You already know that the strategy, electing president to appoint pro-life justices to overturn Roe versus Wade in 1992 doesn't work. Because they don't. Instead, they vote in Planned Parenthood versus Casey to double down on Roe versus Wade. Not just to uphold it and keep it around, but to double down and say now you can't even create an undue burden to a woman's right to an abortion in Roe versus Wade. And of those 6 new Republican-appointed justices, 4 of them vote to do that. 4 of them vote to uphold Roe versus Wade. 4 of them vote to double down on Roe versus Wade. 3 of the 3 that President Reagan appointed, 2 of them vote to uphold Roe versus Wade. That means that even if we had President Reagans from now into infinity, before Christ comes back, if 2 out of every 3 are going to vote to uphold Roe, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that we're never going to overturn Roe at that rate. If the majority of justices appointed, even by Republicans, are just voting to uphold Roe. Well, since then, we had a Democrat president, President Clinton, and he starts appointing justices to the court for 2 terms. But then we get another Republican president, President Bush, and he starts appointing justices to the court. Justice Roberts, and he appoints Justice Alito, both of whom are still on the court today. And then we get another Democrat president, President Obama, and he appoints a couple to the court, and he just replaces a couple of people who voted for Roe with a couple more people who will probably also vote for Roe, since the Democrat appointees seem to be pretty consistent. Not so much on the Republican side. And then Scalia steps down, but before President Obama can replace him, they hold off the vote, and we get a new president, President Trump. And President Trump replaces Scalia with Justice Gorsuch, and then Justice Kennedy goes off the court and is replaced by Justice Kavanaugh. And so this is the makeup of the court that we have today. You notice anything familiar about that makeup of the court? We have the majority. Republican appointees have the majority. Guess what? We've always had the majority. Yep. We've always had the majority for the last 47 years, except for a few months when Scalia, after he passed away, there was a tie. But other than those few months, we've always had the majority. We've always had the majority. And today we have the majority. We have the majority. And yet we still have abortion. Not only have we had the majority of the court for the last 47 years, right? We've had the court, this is since 1992, this is since Casey. People keep telling us, all we need to overturn Roe is to get the court. We've had the court. Since 1992, we've had the court. Since 1973, we've had the court. We have that. And not only have we had the court, but for 3 sessions of Congress, which are 2 years each, for 6 years during the administration of President Bush, we had everything. We had the presidency, we had the House, we had the Senate, we had the court, we had it all. Did we end abortion? Did we overturn Roe? No. The carrots kept out there just a little bit in front. Oh, we just need to elect one more Republican president, and this time, I promise you'll get what you want. Okay, yeah. Not buying it. And you know what? Even the first 2 years of President Trump's term, his first term, we had everything. The presidency, the House, the Senate, the court, everything. And yet we still had abortion. The Democrats haven't had that. They only had a couple of terms of Congress where they had even the presidency and the Congress. And they've never had the court. Then how do we, if Democrat is a if pro-abortion, if pro-choice is a Democrat thing, then why do we still have it when we've been the ones who've been winning? Well, draw your own conclusions. But I can tell you, if you don't like the direction of our government since 1992, since the Casey decision, the ones we have to blame are us. Us. Not anybody else. Now, I'm not here to defend Democrats, absolutely not. But what I am here to show you is that this whole idea of our strategy being all about electing Republican presidents to appoint pro-life justices to overturn Roe has not worked. It hasn't worked, among other problems with it. We'll talk more about, and you'll hear a lot more about. But it hasn't worked. So this strategy, this Republican, this pro-life lobby strategy is not working. And here's the thing. It doesn't look like it's going to work anytime soon. Because some people say, well, Bradley, hold on here a minute, hold on. Those 5 justices on the court, those 5 Republican justices, we know where one of them is. We know he's against Roe. He's been consistent. That's Justice Thomas. Praise God for him. But 4 of them, we really just don't know. We need to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, we do have some information. We have some information. First of all, the fact that none of them have ever publicly said anything opposing Roe. And the fact that every one of them in their confirmation hearings said, oh yeah, Roe is super precedent. But we actually have more information than just that. In 2007, a case came before the Supreme Court that it decided, Gonzales versus Carhart, because Congress passed a federal ban on partial birth abortion. And it got sued, and it went up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came down and they upheld the ban, right? It was a pro-life victory. The court said, yes, the Congress can ban partial birth abortions, okay? And the author of that opinion was Justice Kennedy, and this is what he wrote in that opinion that is celebrated as a pro-life victory. He said, we assume the following principles for the purposes of this opinion. Before viability, a state may not prohibit any woman from making the ultimate decision to terminate her pregnancy. It also may not impose upon this right an undue burden, which exists if a regulation's purpose or effect is to place a substantial obstacle in the path of a woman seeking an abortion before the fetus attains viability. So that's what Kennedy wrote in that opinion that is a pro-life victory. Well, Justice Thomas, he decided, he agreed with the outcome. He joined the opinion. He said, yeah, Congress can ban partial birth abortion. I agree with that. But I don't agree with the way everything else that Kennedy said. Imagine yourself if you were on a board of an organization and there was a big public controversy and the board decided to do something, maybe to fire somebody or something like that, and you agreed with it. But then you walked out of the board meeting and they put out a press release and you didn't agree with why they did what they did or how they explained what the board did, what it did. What would you do in that situation? You agreed with the firing of the person, but you don't agree with the reason that's given to the public. What would you do? Well, if it's important enough, you're going to write your own press release. And you're going to say, I agree with that. I agree with firing this person, but I don't agree with those reasons. These are my reasons for why I supported that. Well, that's what Justice Thomas did. He wrote an opinion, a concurrence Concurrence, which just means I concur, I agree, but I want to state my own reasons. He says, I join the court's opinion because it accurately applies current jurisprudence, including Casey, but I write separately to reiterate my view that the court's abortion jurisprudence, including Casey and Roe versus Wade, has no basis in the Constitution. Right? Exactly. He basically says Roe and Casey are unconstitutional. All right. And he circulated his opinion. They always circulate their opinion to the other justices, and they say, would you like to join my opinion? And all they have to do is say, sure. And he puts their name on there, or types their name on there, and their name goes on that opinion. So he circulated his opinion, and Justice Scalia said, hey, I agree with that. I'll put my name on there. He circulated his opinion to Justice Roberts and to Justice Alito. Will you put your name on there? Do you agree that Roe versus Wade has no basis in the Constitution? They say, we don't want to sign on to that. We don't want to say that. Okay. So they had a chance there, an easy chance to say, add my name to that, an easy chance to say they opposed Roe versus Wade. They said, no, hard pass on that. Thanks. But that's not the only time that this happened. In 2016, another case came up before the Supreme Court. HB 2 was passed in Texas. It was a bill regulating abortion in 3 different ways. And the court ended up coming down and striking down the 2 ways that were challenged. And Justice Thomas said, well, I disagree with that. So I'm going to write a dissent. I'm going to write a dissent and explain why I disagree with how the court came down on that. Justice Thomas said, this suit is possible only because the court has allowed abortion clinics and physicians to invoke a putative, that is a supposed constitutional right that does not belong to them, a woman's right to abortion. And then Thomas says very clearly, I remain fundamentally opposed to the court's abortion jurisprudence. That means Roe and Casey and all that. I'm fundamentally opposed to Roe versus Wade. Great. Scalia wasn't around anymore. He had passed away, so his name is on it. But again, Thomas undoubtedly circulates his opinion to all the other justices and says, anybody want to join me on this opinion? Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, anybody? No. I'm sorry, Gorsuch was not yet on the court at that point, but I'll get to him later. And they said, no, thank you. We don't want to say what you just said. We don't want to say that we're opposed to the court's abortion jurisprudence. Okay. But Alito did write his own dissent. He wrote his own dissent. He said, I disagree with how this case ended up, but the constitutionality of laws regulating abortion is one of the most controversial issues in American law. But this case does not require us to delve into that contentious dispute. And his dissent was really kind of got into legal technicalities about why he disagreed with the outcome. He didn't disagree with the outcome, or at least his stated reason for disagreeing with the outcome was not because of the issue of abortion itself, as he says here. I'm not getting into that. He just talks about legal, jurisprudential kind of things. And Thomas agreed. You can see Thomas did sign on to that because he agreed with Alito's kind of technical reasons. But Alito did not sign on to Thomas's, which said, I'm fundamentally opposed to Roe. He didn't. So that's why, at least for 2 of these Republican justices, who many people would say, well, we really just don't know what they would do, I'm going to slide 2 of them over toward the for Roe side, because so far all of the evidence has demonstrated that they are way more likely to be for Roe than against it. Well, what about the 2 other, the newest justices appointed by President Trump, Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kavanaugh? What have they done? Well, again, like the others, other than Thomas, I have not seen a public statement from them or anything from them on any case or any time before being appointed publicly opposing Roe versus Wade. So the evidence, there's basically no evidence on the side of the scale that they oppose it. But a couple things have happened just last year that are very interesting on this issue. And that is that a case came up before the Supreme Court that had been ruled on by a trial court and then by one of the circuit courts, the appellate courts. And it was this case, Commissioner of Indiana Department of Health versus Planned Parenthood of Indiana and Kentucky. And it was a case considering what's called a Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act, or PRENDA, is how it's normally referred to, PRENDA, Prenatal Non-Discrimination Act, which basically says, listen, you can get an abortion for no reason or for crazy reasons, but you cannot get an abortion for these reasons: race, sex, mental disability. You can't get an abortion for those reasons. You can get an abortion because it's Tuesday, but you can't get an abortion for one of these reasons. You can get an abortion for no reason, but not one of these reasons. That's a whole other issue. But that's the case that Planned Parenthood sued, because Indiana had passed that bill and it had been signed into law, and Planned Parenthood sued, and it went all the way up. And the Indiana lost at the trial court, lost at the appellate court. The appellate court had ruled to strike down PRENDA, and then Indiana brought it up to the Supreme Court and said, we want you to rule on this for you to say that we can protect babies from being aborted for the wrong reasons. And the Supreme Court said, no, we don't even want to hear that case. We're just going to leave it how it is. The appellate court struck it down. We'll just leave it be. We'll just leave that there, thank you. And in fact, Justice Thomas even agreed with that, which sounds odd at first, that he would agree with that, considering that he's opposed to Roe, and I don't think he's not an abolitionist, so he should be upholding pro-life bans and regulation. He should want to uphold them. So he should want to hear this case so he can reverse the appellate court and uphold this ban. And he writes a concurrence that basically says that, and it's actually a lot of really good stuff in there. He compares abortion to slavery and a lot of really good things. But he ultimately agrees, we don't want to hear this case. And he doesn't exactly say why, but I think you can read between the lines. It's like, wait, we've got 5 Republican justices on the court. This is a pro-life bill that's come up before the court. Why would even Justice Thomas not want to hear this case and decide this case? The only good reason that I can think of is because he's afraid that if they do hear it, they're going to agree with it. In other words, they're going to make it worse. So he's like, I don't want the Supreme Court hearing this case because they're going to vote the wrong way. And it wasn't just at PRENDA. The dismemberment abortion ban last year as well went up to the Supreme Court. The dismemberment abortion ban in Alabama had been struck down by the trial court, struck down by the appellate court, and it went up and they asked the Supreme Court to hear it. And again, they said no. Cert denied. To request the court to hear your case, it's called a writ of certiorari. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but I'm from Texas, so I'm allowed to do that. But the court denied cert, denied their petition, denied their writ. So again, Justice Thomas writes a concurrence and basically says, abortion's really bad, but we don't want to hear this case. Why? Again, I think the same reason. He knows something that the rest of us don't know, and that is, if this case goes up to the court, they're probably going to agree with the appellate court in striking down this pro-life bill. Today, there's only one current justice that has ever publicly opposed upholding Roe. There's only one. And so this is what it has looked like for the last 47 years as we have tried to overturn Roe versus Wade. And we've been electing Republican presidents, and they've been appointing justices to the court, and the court has been majority Republican for the last 47 years, and they've been telling us that they're going to overturn Roe versus Wade, and we believe them again and again and again and again and again and again and again, no matter how many times they don't do what they say they're going to do. And yet, we believe them. Man, if only we had that much faith in other areas of our lives, we could move mountains with that kind of faith. Well, but Bradley, at least we've been passing incremental bills, right? At least we've been doing that. At least we've been gaining some yards in other areas, marching down the field. Okay, yeah, more bad news here. I'm just going to look at some of the bills that have gone to the U.S. Supreme Court. Because some people have said, well, we just haven't had enough cases for the court. Are you serious? In the 1970s, these are all of the cases regarding abortion just that the Supreme Court decided. And then 1980s, we had more. In the 1990s, more. In the 2000s, more. In 2010s, more cases relating to abortion. And let me tell you, almost every single one of these, we lost. Okay, we lost. You know, I always like to point out, wow, you know, it's the 70s, 80s, 90s, there's quite a few bills going up there. 2010s, not so much. Probably because we keep running out of things to lose on. Okay? We're running out of issues to lose on. So yeah, we've been passing incremental legislation for 47 years, and we've been losing. And they have not been undermining Roe, I can assure you. Here's the cases that we've won. Listen to this. And these are pro-life bills straight from the pro-life lobby. We had a bill that said, well, states can prohibit non-physicians from performing abortion. States can say, hey, it's got to be a doctor. Okay. That you have to have the woman's informed consent. Well, yeah. That the abortion mill has to keep records, that the federal government only funds some abortions, that state Medicaid must only fund some abortions, that we may require parent or court consent for minors, that we may require parental notice for immature minors, because more mature minors, parents don't even have to get notice that their child had an abortion or is getting one. That we may require abortion mills to be licensed like other hospitals and doctors. That the state is not required to use resources for abortions. And then we had the federal partial birth abortion ban. Those have been the wins. Those have been the wins of the pro-life movement. You know what we've won? You see something common among all of that? What we've won is that in the United States of America, abortion is health care. It's just like health care. You got to have a doctor. The doctor's got to keep records. The doctor has to be licensed. Oh, okay. We have not won. These are our losses. These are our losses just before the Supreme Court. States can prohibit abortion ads. Life of the mother abortion is not enough. You can't just say prohibit abortions but allow life of the mother abortions. States may not require the father's consent. States may not require parental consent. States may not prohibit saline abortions after 12 weeks. Abortionists have standing to sue, which is an anomaly in the legal world. That's a whole different issue. States may not require the safest technique for the baby, may not require abortions to be done in a hospital, may not require that women be told that the unborn child is a human life from the moment of conception, may not require that fetal remains be disposed of in a humane and sanitary manner, may not have waiting periods, even for minors, may not require notification of the father, not even notification of the father. One state said, well, we're going to do a law that says at least the mom has to tell the dad. The Supreme Court said no. May not require hospital admitting privileges, may not require surgical center standards, may not unduly burden a woman's right and a woman's access to an abortion. Those are the losses at the Supreme Court. Those are the things that we said, can we do this? No. How about this? No. Well, how about this? No. No. You cannot unduly burden a woman's so-called right to an abortion, access to abortion. We've not been undermining Roe. And I'll be talking later this evening about we've been reinforcing it. We've been reinforcing Roe. But Bradley, we have been saving some babies, right? Maybe. maybe some in the short term. In the short term, maybe. And when I talk about the pro-life, I'm talking about the pro-life lobby. I'm talking about legally and politically. There have been many saved by brave heroes that call themselves abolitionists or call themselves pro-life and call themselves lots of things. By the grace of God, there have been many babies that have been saved. But we're talking about the legislation here and the strategy of the pro-life lobby. Is the incremental legislation saving babies? Well, abortion numbers are going down, and some of that can be attributed to those pro-life lobby laws sometimes. But again, even those that are, I argue, yeah, you may be saving some in the long term, but you're reinforcing the concept of abortion and of judicial supremacy and of Roe versus Wade. So you're sacrificing many more in the long term. You're saving some in the short term, but sacrificing many more in the long term. But here's something else that's very interesting. I'd love to find a statistician who could really do a paper on this. And that is, abortion numbers are going down, but they're actually going down in places that you would not expect. Of course, you would expect them to be going down in Texas. It's a pro-life state. It's passing pro-life legislation. And abortion numbers are going down in Texas. Now, it's slowed down the past several years. It's kind of plateaued a little bit, but abortion numbers are still going down ever so slightly recently. And Texas' abortion rate. So the last number you just saw is the actual number of abortions. Well, this is the abortion rate. The abortion rate is going down in Texas. That's the blue line. The abortion rate is going down. But I want you to look at that orange line right there. I want you to look at that orange line. The orange line is the abortion rate in the entire United States. The abortion rate in the entire United States is going down. Well, that's Bradley, that's because all the pro-life states that are passing these incremental bills, that the abortions are going way down there, and that's pulling the average down, right? Actually, no. Let's go look at New York, which last year we were all grieving because they were celebrating abortions up until birth. Their numbers are going down. Their abortion numbers are going down. Their abortion rate is going down. Yeah, Bradley, but abortion, New York is a big state. New York City, though, they got to be going up. New York City's abortion numbers are going down. New York City's abortion rate is going down across the country. Now, you can't tell me that it's going down there because of incremental pro-life legislation. Because there is no incremental pro-life legislation in New York City or in New York State that's being signed into law. Quite the opposite. Yeah. And yet, their numbers are going down too. So that's why anytime I hear pro-life legislators or pro-life lobbyists thumping their chest and saying, hey, abortion numbers are going down across the country, I say, not so fast. You really can't take all the credit for that, since the same thing is happening in states that aren't passing the bills that you're supporting. Here's what it looks, just to focus in here for a moment. Here's Texas. Here's New York. They're dropping faster in New York. Look here in Texas. I kind of cropped this out. It drops below the little cutoff there in New York, and even in New York City. So, are some babies being saved? Praise God, yes. But you can't give a lot of credit to the pro-life laws that are being passed for why that's happening. Well, Bradley, at least, okay, man, you've taken so much away from us. Okay, something else. Something, can we claim victory on something? Okay, I got it. At least we've got the pro-abortion movement on the run. We've got them on the run. We're winning. We're weakening them. They're getting weaker over time. Yeah, that's what it looks like to me too. No. Not in terms of politically or legally, no. Now, there's some great things that are going on culturally and medically that are really wonderful, but from a legal and political perspective, no. No, which is where we're talking about the incremental legislation. Planned Parenthood's government funding since 2000, up, keeps going up. Even now, it's still going up. Their revenue keeps going up. It took a slight dip this last year, but it also took a slight dip even during President Obama's presidency. But before that, it took a big jump. In fact, the biggest jump ever from 2017 to 2018. Their revenue keeps going up. Why is that, though? I mean, we keep passing these bills, and from 2011 to 2016, there were 334 pro-life bills across the country in a 5-year period. 334. We're passing these bills. Why is Planned Parenthood, why is it not weakening them like we've been told that it would? Well, you know, big businesses like regulations. Big businesses like regulations. Just like incumbent politicians like campaign finance laws. They like to make it difficult to become a politician. Big businesses like to make it difficult for you to do business. Why? Because it eliminates their competition. And then they can charge more, have less customer service, provide a lower product. Well, that's what these pro-life regulations have been. We've been regulating abortion. And who does regulations help? Big business, big abortion, Planned Parenthood. In fact, a justice on the U.S. Supreme Court actually pointed this out. In that case in 2016, Justice Alito said, Planned Parenthood is obviously able to comply with the challenged HB2 requirements. The president of Petitioner Whole Woman's Health, a much smaller entity, has complained that Planned Parenthood puts local independent businesses in a tough situation. Planned Parenthood is able to comply with all the regulations. They love pro-life regulations because it gets rid of their competition. And they gobble up the market share, for those of you who are engaged in business. Because guess what? This is the percentage of abortions that Planned Parenthood does. And it's higher and higher and higher, and they're up to 40% of abortions are done by Planned Parenthood now, and it just keeps going up. It almost seems like the more regulations we pass, the better they do. So are we weakening the pro-abortion movement by passing this incremental legislation? I don't think so. There have been more than 61 million dead over the last 47 years while we've been following this strategy of the pro-life lobby. They have been 47 years of failure, and we need to be willing to admit that. We can't move on from here until we admit this has been a failure. This has been a failure. We need to admit that to ourselves. Stop lying to ourselves. Stop deceiving ourselves. Stop being Pollyanna and just believing what you want to believe, and look at the facts. Look at what has gone on. It's been a failure. And I'm not saying that the people in the pro-life lobby are evil. Many of them are well-intentioned. But this hasn't worked for a number of reasons, as we'll talk about in my next talk. So changing the court hasn't worked. We need to ignore it. We need to ignore Roe versus Wade. And that's what we're going to be talking about more in my next talk. So, thank you.